The autumn sky was gray and heavy when Claire returned to her apartment. For the past 3 days, she had been helping her parents make arrangements for her grandfather's funeral. His death had not been unexpected. His health had been failing for years. Still, the silence he left behind seemed enormous. He had been the kind of man who filled rooms with his presence, his deep voice carrying across Sunday dinners, his laughter rising above every story. Now his absence echoed louder than his voice ever had. The apartment felt different when she entered, colder somehow, though the heater hummed steadily. She placed her bag by the door, dropped her keys on the counter, and sank into the couch. For the first time since his passing, she was alone. No aunts arguing over details, no uncles sharing drinks in his honor, no cousins whispering about who had or hadn't been invited. Just Claire, the hum of the refrigerator, and the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was another cousin asking about the service. But when the notification light flashed insistently, she reached for it. A missed call. No name, just a number. She frowned, but when she checked the voicemail, her hand froze. The name that appeared was her grandfather's. Her phone still had his number saved, though it had been years since he had actually called her. A strange stillness fell over her as she tapped the screen, the glow of the display casting faint shadows across the room. There should have been nothing there. He was gone. His phone, his number, all of it should have been disconnected by now. Yet somehow, he had left her a message. When she pressed play, the recording filled the quiet apartment. At first it was only static, a low hiss like wind over an old microphone. Then a voice emerged from the distortion. It was unmistakable. Her grandfather. His tone was strained, weary, almost broken, but the cadence of his words was his own. He spoke slowly, as though each syllable carried immense weight. What chilled her most was not the fact that he had called from beyond the grave, but what he said. He warned her not to attend his funeral. His words carried urgency, layered with something darker, a tone she had never heard from him in life. He told her not to go, not to step into the church, not to approach the casket, because something else would be waiting there. The message ended abruptly, swallowed by static that roared until the voicemail cut off. Claire sat motionless, the phone heavy in her hand. The walls of her apartment seemed to draw closer, the silence pressing harder than before. Her grandfather was dead. That was a truth she could not deny. Yet his voice had followed her across that divide, warning her of something she could not understand. And the funeral was tomorrow. That night, Claire could not sleep. The voicemail replayed in her mind again and again, each repetition more unsettling than the last. She told herself there had to be an explanation, some glitch, a recycled number, maybe even an old message that had been delayed for years. Technology did strange things, after all. But none of those explanations accounted for the tone of his voice or for the words he had chosen. The memory of her grandfather's voice was sharp in her mind, but this had been different. In life, he had always spoken with warmth, even when he was stern. But the message carried something hollow, strained, as if he were speaking from a place of suffering. His breaths had been shallow, his words punctuated by a faint distortion that was not static, but something deeper, almost like the dragging of soil. She tried to distract herself, scrolling endlessly through her phone, turning on the television, even stepping out onto the balcony for a breath of the cool night air. Yet everywhere she went, she felt watched. Her own reflection in the sliding glass door seemed delayed, as if her movements were being mimicked rather than mirrored. When she looked away and glanced back, she thought, just for a second, that the reflection was smiling faintly, though her lips were not. The hours crawled. At some point, she drifted into a shallow sleep on the couch, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand. Dreams came quickly, vivid and suffocating. She found herself standing in the church where the funeral would be held. The pews were filled, but every face was turned away, obscured in shadow. The casket at the front was open, but when she tried to approach it, her grandfather's voice echoed from within. telling her again not to come closer. She woke with a start. The phone buzzed against her palm. Her heart pounded as she looked down at the screen. Another missed call. The name glowing back at her was the same, her grandfather's. This time, she did not wait. She opened the voicemail immediately, though her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. The recording began with static again, but the voice that emerged was weaker, thinner, like someone calling from very far away. He repeated his warning, the same words as before, though distorted now, each syllable breaking into fragments. The sound was nearly swallowed by something else beneath it, a rumbling low tone that reminded her of dirt cascading into an open grave. When the message ended, she sat in the dark apartment, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles ached. This was not a glitch. This was not a recycled number. Her grandfather was reaching out, and whatever he feared was tied to his funeral. Morning came gray and muted, the sky heavy with low clouds that threatened rain. Claire dressed slowly, her movement mechanical, her body heavy with fatigue. Despite every part of her screaming otherwise, she prepared to attend the funeral. To stay away would have raised questions she could not answer. Her family would expect her there, her parents especially, and she could not bring herself to explain that her dead grandfather had called her phone in the night. Still, her unease grew with every step she took toward the church. The street seemed unfamiliar, distorted, as though the entire town were draped in a veil of shadow. Storefronts appeared dim, the faces of strangers blurred, and the traffic lights flickered in unnatural rhythms. By the time she arrived, the church loomed above her like a monolith, its stained glass windows darkened, its steeple clawing at the clouds. Inside, the air was heavy with incense, but beneath it lingered a damp, earthy smell, like soil after rain. The pews filled slowly with family members and old acquaintances, their hushed voices echoing strangely off the vaulted ceiling. Claire noticed the way sound seemed stretched, as though every whisper carried a half-second too long, repeating faintly from corners that should have been empty. The casket stood at the front of the sanctuary, polished with gleaming faintly in the dim light. Claire tried not to look at it, but her eyes were drawn again and again to the shape resting within. Her grandfather's body was arranged neatly, his hands folded, his suit pressed. Yet something about his face unsettled her. It was not grief that troubled her. She had seen death before. It was that the expression he wore was not peaceful. His features were tense, his lips pressed as though he had died trying to speak. As the service began, the priest's voice rose in solemn cadence, though Claire heard little of it. Her attention drifted to her phone in her lap. She had silenced it before entering, but now she felt it buzz against her palm. Slowly, she glanced down. A new call. The name glowed on the screen like a wound. Her grandfather. Her throat tightened as she declined the call, sliding the phone back into her bag. But the vibration came again, insistent, like something clawing to get through. She dared not answer. Not here, not with the coffin only a few feet away. The service continued, the hymns echoing through the church, but Claire felt increasingly isolated, as though she were trapped within a different space than everyone else. The air grew colder, her breath fogging faintly, though no one else seemed to notice. Shadows bent at the edges of the pews, stretching too long, pooling where they should not. When the priest called for a moment of silent prayer, the church fell quiet. Heads bowed, hands clasped, a heavy hush descending over the crowd. Claire's phone vibrated once more, harder this time, rattling faintly against the wood of the pew. Against every instinct, she pulled it out. A new voicemail notification glowed on the screen. She knew she should wait. She knew she should put away. But her thumb tapped the screen before her mind could stop it. The message began the same, static distortion, but then came the voice. Her grandfather again, but more desperate, his words fractured by interference. He repeated his warning not to approach, not to look into the coffin. His voice cracked on the last sentence, almost breaking into a sob, and then the static shifted. This time, she heard something else layered beneath it, A second voice, not his, but lower, rougher, guttural, as though it came from beneath the ground itself. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakable. It was not a warning. It was a promise. Her eyes rose slowly to the casket. For a moment, she swore her grandfather's lips had parted. The moment of silence ended, the service continuing as though nothing had happened. But Claire sat frozen in the pew, her skin cold, her breath shallow, her phone trembling faintly in her grip. She had ignored the warning. And now, something else was here. The service moved forward, but Claire could not hear the words anymore. The priest's voice was muffled, distant, as if carried through thick water. The hum of the organ reverberated too low, deeper than it should have been, vibrating in her chest like a heartbeat that did not belong to her. Every sound was layered, distorted, as though something else echoed beneath the surface of ordinary life. She kept her eyes fixed on the casket at the front of the church. Though the distance was only a few yards, it felt as if she were staring across a vast chasm. The light that filtered through the stained glass windows struck the polished wood, but the gleam did not comfort her. Instead, it rippled faintly, as though the surface were not what at all but water, dark and bottomless. Around her, the congregation remained motionless. Their heads bowed, their hands folded, they seemed suspended in time. Claire realized with a jolt that she could not hear them breathing. Dozens of bodies filled the pews, yet not one chest rose or fell. The silence between hymns was absolute. Her phone buzzed once more. She lifted it with trembling hands, though she did not remember choosing to do so. The screen glowed in the dim sanctuary, showing another missed call. Again, her grandfather's name. But this time there was no voicemail waiting. Only the faint hum of the device, vibrating as though caught between signals, neither ringing nor silent. She turned her gaze back to the coffin. Something had changed. His hands, folded neatly when she first saw them, now rested differently, one tilted at an unnatural angle, as though it had shifted on its own. His face no longer seemed tense but slack, the mouth slightly ajar. The air grew heavy with the smell of damp earth, overpowering the incense, seeping into her lungs. Then she noticed the shadows. They gathered at the corners of the church, thick and fluid, crawling up the walls like smoke. They stretched slowly across the floor, reaching toward the casket, tendrils of darkness converging upon it like streams feeding into a river. As they touched the base of the coffin, the wood darkened, veins of black spreading outward as though it were rotting in real time. Claire gripped the edge of the pew, her fingernails digging into the wood. No one else reacted. The priest continued speaking, the congregation unmoving, all as if nothing had changed. Only she could see the creeping corruption. Only she felt the growing pressure in the air, a weight that bore down on her chest with every breath. Her phone buzzed again, but this time the sound emerged not from the device, but from the air itself. A faint ringing filled the sanctuary, muffled, distorted, echoing as though coming from beneath the floorboards. With each ring, the casket trembled faintly. The ringing stopped, and then the voice came, not from her phone, not from her own mind, but from the coffin itself. It was her grandfather's voice again, cracked and desperate, pleading for her not to look inside. But layered beneath his words was something deeper, a guttural resonance that twisted the message until it became almost unrecognizable. The voices overlapped, one warning, the other beckoning. The lid of the casket shifted. It was only an inch, but enough for Claire to see darkness spilling from the gap, not shadow but substance, thick and curling like smoke from a fire. The air grew colder, her breath visible, her skin prickling with frost. The smell of earth grew unbearable, choking her, filling her throat and lungs. Her grandfather had been right. Something else was waiting, and now it was waking up. The church seemed to buckle under the weight of silence. The priest's voice faltered, his words melting into indistinct murmurs, and the congregation remained frozen, statues in their pews. Claire's heart pounded violently. the sound echoing in her ears like a drum, the only sign of life in the suffocating stillness. The coffin lid shifted again, slowly, deliberately, as though something beneath it was testing the barrier. The black smoke poured steadily from the crack, twisting upward in tendrils that writhed like living things. They coiled toward the vaulted ceiling, blotting out the colored light from the stained glass windows, replacing the hues of saints and angels with a creeping void. Claire wanted to flee, to rise from the pew and run, but her body was locked in place. Her legs felt weighted, her chest compressed, every muscle taut with invisible chains. She could only watch as the smoke thickened, stretching across the church until it pressed against her skin like damp cloth. Her phone buzzed again. She pulled it up with trembling hands. A voicemail notification. The final one. Against all reason, she pressed play. The static burst into her ear, but this time the voice was sharp, urgent, raw with fear. It was her grandfather, more desperate than before, his words rushing as though he had only moments left. He told her this was not a funeral. It was a gathering. A door had been opened, and his death was the key. Something ancient, something that fed on grief, had been waiting to pass through. He begged her not to look inside, not to let it know she saw it, because if she acknowledged it, it would claim her too. The message ended abruptly, and then the coffin lid creaked wide. The figure inside was not her grandfather. His body remained, yes, but the face was shifting, melting like wax under heat, features contorting into something neither human nor entirely formless. The mouth stretched impossibly wide, dark smoke billowing from within, the sound of 1,000 voices whispering in unison. The guttural tones she had heard beneath the voicemails now filled the sanctuary, vibrating the walls, shaking the pews, pressing into her skull. The congregation finally moved, but not as people should. Heads lifted in unison, faces pale and hollow, eyes black voids reflecting nothing. They turned toward her all at once, their necks bending too far, their movements jerky like marionettes on tangled strings. The thing in the coffin rose, its limbs grotesque imitations of her grandfather's, lengthened and skeletal, its form wrapped in shadows that poured endlessly from its body. Its face split again, a cavernous maw, and from deep within came the sound of a ringing phone. Her phone, the same tone, the same endless buzz. She dropped the device. It clattered the wooden floor, but the ringing did not stop. It grew louder, echoing not from the phone itself, but from every corner of the church, from beneath the pews, from within the walls, from inside her own skull. Claire tried to scream, but no sound came. The entity stepped forward, its smoke-like tendrils reaching across the aisle toward her. She felt her grandfather's voice one last time, faint and fractured, whispering in the static of her mind. Not words now, just sorrow, a farewell carried across the abyss. The tendrils touched her skin, cold, heavy, pulling. The world dissolved into blackness. When the congregation blinked awake moments later, they saw nothing unusual. The priest resumed his prayer. The coffin remained closed. The air smelled only faintly of incense. Claire's parents looked around for their daughter, puzzled that she had not returned from the restroom. They assumed she had stepped outside for air. Her phone lay under the pew, screen shattered, a single voicemail notification glowing faintly before the battery died. No one ever found her.